Hello, James, and anyone else that's listening. This is the second of our Ulysses passages entitled The Lotus Eaters. This is a wonderful story, and it's not that well known actually from the Odyssey, which is concerning temptation. If, for instance, someone were off in a faraway land and they were tempted by the wonderful pubs of London into not returning to their homeland and getting a perfect score, for instance, in their Latin exams, then this would be the temptation of the lotus eaters, something that's sort of wonderful and tempting you away from your final mission, from your real mission, from Odysseus's journey home, the lotus eaters. Postquam tamen pauca milia passum alitore Troiae progressi sunt tanta tempestas subito corta est ut nulla navium cursum tenere posset, sed alias in partes disicerentur. After, however, progressi sunt, they'd set out a few thousand paces from the shore of Troy. We could just say a few kilometres, I suppose, because 1,000 paces obviously is here representative of a kilometre, a mile, whatever you want to say. After, however, they'd set forth a few thousand paces from the shore of Troy, tanta tempestas subito corta est, suddenly such a storm rose up, ut that, and as soon as I see tanta, I'm thinking to myself that I'm probably going to see an ut, and indeed a subjunctive ending, which we have in the ut and the posset. So, such a storm rose up, ut, that. It is, therefore, of course, a result clause, that none of the ships was able to hold its course, said alii, but each disicerentur, still in the subjunctive, because it's still part of this result clause, that passive subjunctive ending, but each was being scattered about into different alias partes, into different directions. Navis autem, however, the ship, qua ipse ulixes vehebator, however, the ship on which Ulysses himself was being transported, was being carried, vehebator, imperfect subjunctive, third person singular, delata vi tempestatis, literally with the having been carried by the strength of the storm at midday, decimo die, on the 10th day, apulsa est, was driven off ad litus Libyae, was driven off to the shore of Libya. Ancoris iactis, ulixes constituit nonnulos essocis, interam exponere, qui aquam ad nauem referent, et qualis esset natura eos regionis cognoscerent. Let's do this next bit. Where are we? Ancoris iactis, having lain their anchors out of absolute, I suppose, having put down their anchors, with their anchors having been laid down. I can't even remember what the phrase is for dropping anchor, isn't it? So, having dropped their anchors, Ulysses decided, exponere, to send out nonnulos, not none, so some of his allies onto the land in terram, qui referent, to look at that, qui here replacing ut, so it's the relative pronoun forming part of a purpose clause, to look for, to bring back water to the ship, et, and, cognosceret, to learn, so still part of a purpose clause, and to learn, and now we've got qualis, of what sort, and as soon as I see this qualis, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if this is going to be an indirect question, and indeed it will be. The direct question is, what is the nature of this region? The indirect question is, they learnt of what sort was the nature of this region. So, and to learn what was the nature of Eos, of that region. These men, igitur, therefore, egressi, having gone out, enavi, from the ship, egressi there, from egredior, I go out, egressi, PAP, perfect active participle. These men, therefore, having gone out from their ship, parabant, were preparing, facere, to complete their orders. Egressi, again, I'm just going to repeat that, is a deponent verb and a perfect active participle. Dum, tamen fontem, however, while they are looking for the fountain, facti obviam, so obviam facio literally is I make a meeting with. Having met, quibus, certain inhabitants, they accepti sunt, they were received by them with hospitality. So, facti, having been met, literally, having been met on the way with certain of the natives. Having met certain inhabitants, they accepti sunt, third person plural passive, perfect passive, they were accepted hospitio with hospitality. Accidit autem ut maior pars victus eorum hominum in miro quodam fructu quem lotum appellabant consisteret. However, accidit, it happened, ut, that, maior pars, that a great part, now victus looks like a perfect passive participle. However, it happened that a greater part of their victus can mean perfect passive participle having been conquered, but here it actually comes from literally of living, and it means of nourishment. It happened that a greater part of the food of those people was consisted of an amazing fructu, of an amazing food which they called the lotum, which they called the lotus. So, accidit, however, it happened that a greater part of their nourishment, of the nourishment of eorum, of those people, consisted in an amazing fructu, in an amazing type of food, quem, which they were calling lotum, which they were calling the lotus. Quam cum Graeci gustasent patriae et sociorum statum obliti confirmaverunt se semper in ea terra mansuros ut dulci illo cibo in perpetuum vescerentur. So, that next bit, cum gustasent. Look at that ending, cum plus the subjunctive. As soon as I see a cum plus the subjunctive, I am thinking to myself that I may well be dealing with a purpose clause. So, for this bit, what we've got is, you can hear me clicking on the computer as I'm trying to do two things at once. So, when the Graeci gustasent, we would normally expect it to be vicent, wouldn't we? But here, it's that alternative form of the pluperfect subjunctive. So, it is here, when the Greeks had tasted this, when the Greeks had tasted which thing, but it's a connecting relative then. When the Greeks had tasted this, they obliti, having forgotten about their patriae, about their fatherland, and their sociorum, and their allies, immediately, having forgotten about their fatherland and their allies immediately, and this is where it gets more interesting, their confirmaverunt, they affirmed, they stated, say, that they, and as soon as I see a stating word, confirmaverunt, I'm looking for an accusative, which I can find in the se, and indeed an infinitive mansuros. Now that's taking out the mansuros essay part of it, that's obviously implied. They affirmed that they were always going to stay on that land. I think that bit ends up being obviously quite an important little bit. That's going to be the difficult bit that they've actually got there. That when the Greeks had tasted this, they confirmaverunt, they affirmed, they stated that they were always going to remain on that land, ut, in order that they might vescerentur, in order that they might eat, that they might feed upon that sweet food, ut vescerentur, imperfect subjunctive, in order that they might feed upon that sweet food in perpetuum, forever. As we were going through there, I was suddenly trying to remember what the fructu meant, and if I translated it right in the previous sentence, which I believe that I had, where we said accidit. It happened, however, that the greater part of the food of those people consisterent, as we said there, consisted of the, and I think that we said that consisterent there consisted of the depended upon. I think it said in the part afterwards, depended on an amazing fruit, quem, which they were calling the lotus. When the Greeks had tasted this which thing, as in the quam, the connecting relative, that one, having forgotten about their fatherland and their allies immediately, they affirmed that they would always stay in that land, and that they would, in order that they would feed, that they could feed, purpose clause, on that sweet food in perpetuum, forever. This lotus eaters, this is why whenever you're on your travels, James and anyone else, you must be careful of the temptations, and remember that there is the mission of returning home as well. All the very best then. I'll see you soon.